Welcome to night 28 to fall asleep fast. This is a quiet place where you don't need to focus, remember, or do anything at all. You can simply listen or let the sound fade gently into the background. If it feels right, you can softly like this video now or leave a calm comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is. There's no need to rush. Everything here moves slowly. Tonight, we explore unraveling YouTube's past, the pre-digital echoes of early broadcast channels. A calm and unhurried story from the past, told gently, without urgency and without expectation. You don't need to stay awake for it. You don't need to follow every detail. If you were here last night, welcome back. And if this is your first night, you can begin right here, exactly as you are. A new night will be waiting for you again tomorrow. But for now, allow your breathing to slow, your thoughts to drift, and let this story quietly carry you toward rest. In the years before signals filled the air as something ordinary, there were rooms that felt more like workshops than studios. They stood at the edges of towns or inside quiet industrial buildings, with wooden floors worn smooth by steady footsteps. Windows were often small and set high in the walls, allowing in pale daylight that settled gently over tables crowded with coils, wires, and instruments whose purpose was still being understood. The air inside these rooms carried a faint metallic scent, mixed with oil and warm dust. On long benches, brass fittings and glass components rested beside spools of copper wire wound carefully by hand. Nothing moved quickly. Even the ticking of a clock seemed measured, respectful of the patience required to send something invisible across distance. There were no audiences waiting in anticipation, no sense of performance. The work was quieter than that. It consisted of adjusting a dial by a fraction, tightening a screw, listening for the faintest hum. Transmission in those early days was less an act of broadcasting and more an act of testing the air itself, wondering whether it would carry a tone, a pulse, a human breath. The men who worked in these spaces did not yet think in terms of channels or networks. They thought in wavelengths and resistance, in the delicate balance between signal and silence. Heavy transmitters stood like furniture, built from wood and metal, their surfaces polished by repeated contact. Glass tubes glowed faintly when powered, small contained suns casting amber light across the room. Evenings were often the preferred time for experimentation. As the outside world quieted, interference seemed to soften. Lamps were lit, casting steady halos that did not flicker easily. Shadows gathered in corners but did not threaten. They simply rested there, unmoving. Through open windows in warmer months, the distant sounds of carriage wheels or quiet streets drifted in, blending with the low electrical murmur. Transmission required stillness. A slight adjustment of a component could shift a frequency enough to dissolve the fragile thread of sound. And so movements became careful, almost reverent. Hands hovered before touching. Ears leaned closer to receivers that crackled softly with static, as if the air itself were thinking. At first, what traveled across that space was not speech but simple tones. Pulses. Patterns. Proof that something had moved from one point to another without visible connection. The moment of success did not erupt into celebration. It was marked instead by a shared glance, a quiet nod, and a return to the apparatus. There was always another refinement to attempt, another imperceptible improvement to make. Outside those workshops, the world continued largely unaware. Streets filled and emptied with routine. Shops closed their doors at dusk. Families gathered in lamplit rooms, unaware that somewhere nearby, the air above their rooftops was being gently tested, stretched, and measured. Gradually, the idea formed that sound itself might travel this way, not merely coded pulses but human voice. The thought lingered softly in the background of their work. To send speech through space without wires felt less like an invention and more like a question posed to the night. The first attempts were tentative. A simple phrase spoken into a crude microphone. Pause. Then listening. The response, if it came at all, arrived faint and fragmented, as if carried by wind across an unseen landscape. Yet even in its weakness, it held something unmistakably human. Breath, tone, presence. In those moments, the room seemed to hold itself more still than before. The glow of the equipment felt warmer. The silence between sounds felt deeper. The voice, even distorted, altered the atmosphere. It suggested that the air was no longer empty space but a medium capable of carrying experience itself. There were setbacks, of course, though they unfolded without drama. Circuits failed. Tubes burned out. Signals vanished into interference. Each difficulty was approached not with frustration but with the same measured patience. Components were replaced. Connections tightened. Adjustments made in small increments. Over time the equipment grew more stable. Cabinets became larger, more carefully constructed. Instruments were arranged with intention rather than improvisation. What had once been scattered across tables began to assume the shape of a system. Not yet a studio, not yet a channel, but something more cohesive than before. The room itself began to change in response. Curtains were hung to soften echoes. Furniture was arranged to accommodate not just machines but the possibility of a speaker standing in one place, addressing something unseen. The idea of audience remained abstract, but it was no longer unimaginable. As speech became clearer, those who listened on the receiving end, other experimenters, distant operators, began to recognize familiar tones. A voice repeated at regular intervals created the faint outline of identity. Even without faces, patterns emerged. Certain cadences became recognizable. A rhythm of transmission began to form. And yet, despite these subtle shifts, the atmosphere remained restrained. There were no grand announcements, no sense of arrival. The work continued in evenings lit by warm lamps, under ceilings stained lightly by years of heat. Outside seasons passed. Snow gathered briefly along window ledges in winter. In summer, the air carried the scent of grass and distant fields. The air itself seemed to grow less mysterious and more companionable. It responded, however faintly, to human intention. Each successful transmission left behind a residue of possibility, as if the room had expanded slightly beyond its walls. In time, certain hours became preferred for sending voice rather than tone. The pattern was not formalized, but it was noticed. Late evenings offered clarity. Early mornings brought a different quality of stillness. The experimenters began to understand that transmission was influenced not only by machinery but by the wider rhythm of the world. And so, without ceremony, the act of sending voice into the night grew steadier. It remained fragile, dependent on careful tuning and attentive listening, but it no longer felt improbable. The room that had once tested the air now began to trust it. As equipment grew warmer and more reliable, and as voices traveled a little farther with each attempt, the space itself seemed ready to evolve again, no longer merely a workshop of experimentation, but something closer to a dedicated place for speaking outward. A room shaped not only by wires and coils, but by the steady glow of valves that would soon define the atmosphere entirely. The room that had once felt provisional began to settle into something more deliberate. Heavy tables were replaced with fitted cabinets. Wires that had once crossed surfaces in loose coils were guided into ordered paths behind wooden panels. The equipment remained substantial, but it no longer appeared temporary. It had found its place. By the early 1920s, these interiors carried a distinct glow. Vacuum tubes, housed carefully within polished enclosures, emitted a steady amber light when warmed. Their filaments shone softly, not brightly enough to startle, but enough to transform the room into a space of quiet illumination. Even before a voice was sent outward, the studio felt alive with contained warmth. The air inside such a room was different from that of the workshop that had preceded it. It was warmer, gently stirred by the heat of the valves. Dust rose slowly in narrow beams of light and settled again without urgency. The scent of heated metal and varnished wood lingered, not unpleasant but constant. It gave the space a character of its own, recognizable even with closed eyes. Walls were often lined with wooden acoustic panels, their surfaces absorbing stray echoes. Curtains hung thickly over windows, softening the intrusion of street noise. Outside, life continued in ordinary rhythms, but inside, time felt slightly adjusted. Minutes moved with a different weight, measured not by conversation or movement but by the steady hum of circuitry. Large transmitters stood against the walls like quiet sentinels. Their dials were round and deliberate, with fine markings etched into their faces. Needles trembled slightly as adjustments were made. Hands turned knobs slowly, feeling for the precise point where a signal grew clear and stable. There was no haste in these gestures. Each movement was guided by listening rather than sight. Listening became the primary discipline of the room. Engineers leaned toward headphones, attentive to subtle shifts in tone. A faint crackle might indicate interference from distant electrical storms or the crossing of another station's frequency. Rather than frustration, such disturbances were met with patient recalibration. The goal was not dominance but clarity. Unlike the earlier days of experimentation, these rooms now operated on a schedule, even if loosely defined. Certain hours were set aside for transmission. Equipment was powered gradually, allowing tubes to warm before any sound passed through them. This warming period created a small ritual. The studio would move from silence to a low electrical murmur, then to readiness. The glow of the valves deepened as they reached full temperature. Their glass surfaces reflected one another in layered halos of amber and gold. Shadows formed behind the equipment, steady and elongated. The room felt enclosed yet expansive, as if the walls had grown aware of their purpose. Tables held not only technical components but papers, neatly stacked. Though their contents varied, their presence suggested preparation. Broadcasting was no longer merely the act of proving that sound could travel. It was becoming an act of offering something shaped, arranged, and intended for others to hear. Chairs were positioned with care. A central space was often cleared, marked by a microphone mounted on a weighted stand. The microphone itself, metallic and finely crafted, seemed almost ceremonial. Its grill caught the warm light, and its cable trailed toward the equipment with quiet assurance. It waited without impatience. When the moment came for transmission, the room did not erupt into activity. Instead, it grew more still. Engineers took their positions, glancing at meters and adjusting levels with restrained precision. The microphone stood ready, absorbing the ambient hush. Beyond the walls, receivers in distant homes or other stations were tuned with equal care, though unseen. The first sounds that filled these dedicated studios were often simple announcements or musical interludes. Instruments were sometimes brought into the room, their notes resonating softly against the treated walls. A violin might rest against a shoulder beneath the warm glow, its tone carried outward into the evening. The music did not aim to impress, it aimed to arrive intact. Over time, these rooms developed a temperament. Some were known for clarity, others for their steadiness in difficult weather. Operators learned the character of their equipment as one might learn the habits of a familiar companion. A certain valve might require gentle handling. A particular dial might respond best to gradual adjustments. Even in their growing reliability, the studios retained a sense of intimacy. They were not vast halls but enclosed chambers where a handful of individuals worked in quiet coordination. Communication within the room was minimal, often conveyed through gestures or brief nods. The dominant presence was not conversation but the hum of the system itself. Night broadcasts carried a distinct atmosphere. Outside, streets grew quieter, and the studio felt suspended from the ordinary flow of the city. Moonlight sometimes filtered through the edges of drawn curtains, mixing faintly with the amber interior light. The combination created a layered stillness, as though two forms of illumination coexisted without conflict. In these hours, voices that would soon become familiar began to enter the space more regularly. They arrived with notes in hand, standing before the microphone with measured composure. The room, having been shaped by heat and circuitry, now accommodated breath and tone as well. Before any words were spoken, there was always a brief interval of silence. It was not empty but attentive. The equipment held steady, valves glowing at full warmth, meters poised. The studio seemed to listen before asking to be heard. As broadcasts became routine, the distinction between preparation and performance softened. The ritual of warming tubes, adjusting dials, and checking levels repeated evening after evening. Each repetition reinforced the studio's purpose. The space no longer felt experimental. It felt dependable. Dependability altered the mood of the work. Where once there had been cautious testing, now there was a quiet confidence. Signals traveled farther and more consistently. The glow of the valves, once a symbol of fragile possibility, became an emblem of continuity. And yet, beneath this steadiness, the essential act remained unchanged. A voice would soon enter the room and lean toward the microphone. The machinery would carry it outward, unseen. Listeners, somewhere beyond the walls, would receive it in rooms equally quiet, equally lit by soft lamps. Inside the studio, the warmth persisted. The valves glowed without flicker. The air held its gentle haze. The microphone waited, centered within the amber light, prepared not for spectacle but for the simple presence of a human voice poised to travel through the dark. Within the softly glowing studio, the first human voice began to take shape. It did not demand attention, nor did it seek an audience. It simply existed within the confines of the room, moving gently through the warm air stirred by the steady hum of valves and wires. The microphone, polished and unassuming, captured every subtle inflection, and the sound traveled outward as if carried by the very patience of the room itself. No one saw the speaker in the homes where these sounds would eventually arrive. There was no expectation of recognition, only the simple act of communication. Each word, each breath, was suspended in the quiet amber glow, blending seamlessly with the faint mechanical hum that filled the background. The space seemed to embrace the voice, holding it in gentle balance between silence and transmission. Time unfolded slowly within these moments. A single sentence might stretch across several seconds, its cadences measured and unhurried. There was no rush, no urgency to complete the message before the night slipped away. The speaker moved deliberately, adjusting posture slightly, allowing the natural rhythm of the voice to flow without interference. Even the smallest hesitation became part of the overall texture, a pause that softened the edges of the room. The walls, lined with wooden acoustic panels, absorbed excess sound and lent the voice a clarity that felt natural rather than engineered. Curtains dampened the intrusion of outside noises, while shadows from the warm valves danced slowly across the surfaces, as if acknowledging the presence of each tone. The room seemed attuned to the act of listening as much as speaking, holding its breath in tandem with the speaker. Every inhalation, every quiet exhale, became part of the room's steady pattern. The voice seemed to ripple outward, brushing against the faint haze of warm air, each vibration subtle but present. No audience reacted in real time. Their presence was imagined, a quiet anticipation felt across distance. The speaker, aware or unaware, seemed to perform for a realm defined solely by sound and stillness. Small objects on nearby tables reflected the warm light, glinting softly but never drawing attention from the voice itself. Dials and meters, balanced carefully at precise points, added their own understated rhythm to the scene, their tiny movements almost imperceptible. The glow of the tubes bathed the surfaces in tones that shifted gently as the voice moved, lending each phrase a subtle depth, a resonance that seemed almost tangible. In this setting, the voice took on qualities beyond mere speech. It conveyed presence, a sense of calm attention that reached without intrusion. Phrases moved through the space with a measured patience, filling the studio without overwhelming it. Silence between words was never empty, it held the echo of thought, the promise of continuation, a quiet reassurance that nothing needed to be hurried. The speaker's gestures were minimal. Hands rested lightly on the edges of tables or on the microphone stand. A lean forward, a subtle adjustment of posture, guided the voice as much as technical equipment. Movement in the room was slow and deliberate, in harmony with the light and air, each element cooperating to create a unified atmosphere of attentive stillness. Occasionally, the low hum of machinery interacted with the human element, weaving together a delicate tapestry of sound. Static from a distant transmission might flicker faintly through the speakers, but it did not disturb the calm. Instead, it blended, adding texture to the overall pattern, like a soft wind brushing against the edges of a quiet landscape. The passage of time was nearly imperceptible within the studio. Outside, dusk faded into night, and the city beyond remained unaware of the subtle orchestration unfolding within the warmly lit walls. Shadows deepened slowly across the floor, and the glow of the valves continued without interruption. Each phrase spoken resonated with a patience that suggested hours, yet the progression remained imperceptible to any hurried measure. The voice itself began to form patterns, familiar cadences that repeated across sessions. Even without face or body, it became identifiable, a quiet presence marking the studio as a space of routine and trust. No grand proclamations were needed. Recognition emerged gently over time, carried in the tones, the breathing, the rhythm of words. Sometimes the speaker would introduce a faint musical interlude, a note from a piano or a single string, played softly and integrated into the voice's flow. These sounds did not dominate but added nuance, enhancing the sense of calm. The music lingered as an extension of the voice, a gentle companion to the still, measured transmission. Minutes passed with barely noticeable transitions. Phrases ended as others began. The room maintained equilibrium, balancing the mechanical, the human, and the unseen audience beyond. Air currents stirred lightly, dust motes drifted in the lamp glow, and the voice carried forward, uninterrupted by time or circumstance. There was a slow unfolding of presence that extended beyond the room itself. Though no eyes watched and no faces were known, the voice conveyed reassurance, constancy, and the soft rhythm of attention. It spoke without expectation, filled the room without haste, and left space for silence to return before the next phrase. Every element, light, shadow, warmth, and tone, participated in a gentle choreography. The amber glow from the valves highlighted surfaces just enough to create depth without distraction. The voice resonated in these spaces, adapting to their contours, curling around corners, fading into soft echoes, then returning with quiet insistence. The microphone's metallic surface captured every nuance, every breath, but it never dominated. The voice moved with an almost imperceptible pulse, suspended between the stillness of the studio and the imagined presence of listeners elsewhere. There was no need to project, to perform, or to impress. It existed simply, quietly, patiently. Time in these rooms seemed fluid. A single session could stretch over hours, yet nothing indicated urgency or conclusion. Each transmission was complete in itself but suggested continuity, as though the voice were a river flowing through the space, never stopping yet never racing. The glow of the tubes remained steady, the meters unmoving, and the room absorbed the presence of the speaker as naturally as it held the hum of electricity. As the evening deepened, the voice continued its measured course. Breath, tone, pause, and intonation became a gentle ritual. The room absorbed each vibration, turning it into a calm resonance that might travel far beyond the walls. It was a quiet performance without eyes to witness, yet it was wholly attentive, aware of itself and its purpose. And so, the human voice, unseen and yet fully present, carried through the room with a subtle authority. It did not command attention, nor demand reaction. It simply existed, moving through the prepared space, a soft current of sound preparing for the distant ears that would receive it. Its rhythm and warmth, framed by glowing valves and steady equipment, hinted at the routines yet to settle in the homes where these sounds would be received, leaving the room poised for the next transition into familiar listening spaces. Evenings settled gently over quiet neighborhoods, where small homes held the soft glow of lamps and the faintest warmth of fireplaces. Within these rooms, the voices that had been carried from distant studios drifted into living spaces without demand or urgency. They moved across polished wooden floors and over patterned rugs, mingling with the scent of evening meals and the faint aroma of cooling tea. No one needed to attend closely. The sounds were companions, present yet unobtrusive, capable of filling the silence with a measured patience. Windows framed the dusky light outside, letting in the faint gleam of moon and street lamp. Shadows stretched across walls, softening corners and giving depth to otherwise familiar spaces. Curtains swayed gently with drafts that whispered across open vents, and in these subtle motions, the room itself seemed to participate in the arrival of sound. Each household became a vessel, quietly resonating with the distant pulses of human voice and gentle static, echoing from unseen origins. Families occupied these rooms in understated rhythms. Chairs were arranged with habitual care, tables held small objects of daily life, and soft cloths draped surfaces that caught the lamplight. The presence of listeners shaped the space as delicately as the ambient light, creating an environment that neither demanded attention nor rushed the evening along. Some might recline in armchairs, hands resting loosely in their laps, gazes soft and unfocused. Others sat at tables, their postures unchanging, absorbed in the calm texture of the sound as it wandered through their home. Even as the broadcast filled the rooms, movement was minimal. A hand might reach to adjust a volume dial, a foot might shift lightly on a rug, and still the sound continued uninterrupted. In some homes, a faint ticking of a clock punctuated the rhythm, a steady reminder of the passing night, yet the voice carried on with its measured cadence, weaving seamlessly through each space without haste. The mechanical hum of early receivers added its own subtle layer, blending with the voice to form a quiet chorus of technology and human presence. The evenings themselves held a slow progression. As darkness deepened outside, interior lights glowed warmer, emphasizing the texture of furniture, the folds of curtains and the surfaces of polished wood. The voice, filtered through the equipment, arrived clear yet soft, neither intrusive nor commanding. It became part of the ambient atmosphere, a gentle current weaving around the familiar shapes of household objects. The rhythm of listening merged with the household's routine. Cups were set aside, lamps adjusted, the quiet shuffle of small movements punctuating the otherwise stillness of the room. Each home carried its own signature. The slant of a beam of light, the echo of footfalls on wooden floors, the subtle creak of chairs shifting, all contributed to the perception of sound. No two rooms received the broadcast identically, yet each preserved a sense of intimacy. The listener did not require comprehension, the presence of voice itself sufficed. It filled empty spaces between furniture, brushed across walls, and lingered in corners, transforming familiar rooms into vessels of gentle attention. The outer world, though distant, left traces within these spaces. A passing carriage might rattle faintly against window panes, or the soft footfall of a neighbor could drift through a hallway. These incidental sounds were absorbed by the rooms, becoming part of the tapestry of evening, blending seamlessly with the broadcast. The experience remained calm, uninterrupted by the flow of life beyond the walls, yet subtly connected to it, as though the entire neighborhood participated in a collective, understated rhythm of quiet reception. Lighting played a critical role in shaping perception. Lamps with shaded globes produced pools of soft illumination, while shadows and corners created a sense of depth and enclosure. Moonlight traced delicate patterns across floors and walls, its silvery touch complementing the warmer amber of interior lights. In this interplay of illumination, the voice seemed to float more freely, unbound by physical constraints, moving gently across both furniture and air. Children, if present, were quietly absorbed in their own routines, perhaps nestled with blankets or books, or simply resting while the sound filled the room. There was no urgency to rise, to act, or to respond. Each moment unfolded in a measured cadence, with voice and light harmonizing to form a sense of continuity and reassurance. The households were inhabited, yet not bustling. They were present, yet undemanding, allowing listeners to drift in awareness without effort. Sounds from distant rooms sometimes added texture. A door closed lightly in another part of the house, a kettle released a small hiss, or footsteps moved softly over a distant floorboard. None of these interrupted the broadcast. Rather, they became part of the layered quiet, reinforcing the feeling of ordinary life continuing alongside the extraordinary presence of voices traveling unseen. The home became both stage and sanctuary, a vessel holding both routine and resonance. Within each space, the interplay of voice and light created subtle emotional landscapes. Calm attention unfolded without demand. Breath and tone resonated in ways that suggested connection without expectation. The receiver, humble and mechanical, acted as conduit, translating distant sound into tangible presence. Each note, each inflection, seemed to settle lightly upon the furnishings and walls, lingering just long enough to be noticed before dissolving into quiet. Night progressed with gentle predictability. Shadows deepened, light pools shifted, and the distant hum of the street softened as urban life continued its slow retreat. Inside, the voice maintained its unhurried rhythm, moving through rooms with patience and care. Each household preserved a small microcosm of the wider network of listeners, connected not by vision or proximity but by the shared thread of sound carried invisibly through the air. The presence of human activity was subtle. Hands might adjust a shawl, a foot might shift position, or a chair might creak lightly, but these gestures did not disturb the stillness. They punctuated the broadcast like faint ripples across a calm pond, emphasizing the contrast between minor motion and sustained, gentle resonance. The voice responded not to these movements but continued its quiet path, indifferent to disturbance, complete in its persistence. Evening routines were small, almost imperceptible acts. Lamps were dimmed gradually, newspapers folded neatly, and teacups were returned to saucers with care. Each gesture contributed to the overall sense of calm, a soft choreography of domestic life woven around the presence of distant sound. The home itself seemed to breathe in sync with the voice, inhaling subtle tonal shifts and exhaling moments of stillness. Within this environment, listeners were never compelled to act, to respond, or to attend too closely. Awareness could drift without consequence. Sleep might arrive at any point, yet the continuity of voice provided a gentle anchor. Each note, each faintly audible hum, persisted whether the mind remained focused or allowed itself to wander. The experience was designed to sustain presence without demand, to soothe without insistence, and to accompany the evening into night with serene constancy. The rooms, filled with soft light, subtle movement and distant resonance, became more than physical spaces. They were environments of quiet engagement, places where time seemed to stretch and flow unhurriedly. Each household preserved the distinct warmth of human activity alongside the invisible thread of sound traveling from studio to receiver, creating a layered atmosphere of calm, gentle attention and shared presence. As the evening deepened further, the faint hum of the receiver continued steadily, harmonizing with the warmth of lamps, the shadowed corners of rooms, and the slow rhythm of human routines. The voice, unseen and yet palpably present, maintained its trajectory, preparing each household for the quiet, gentle unfolding of hours still to come. As evening deepened, the faint tones that had traveled from distant studios now spilled beyond the confines of individual homes, threading their way through quiet streets and empty courtyards. Each note, gentle and deliberate, seemed to linger in the cool night air, brushing over cobblestones and worn pavements with an almost imperceptible caress. The streets themselves, usually echoing with daytime commotion, absorbed the sounds with a patience of their own, transforming narrow alleys and broad avenues alike into quiet channels for the distant transmission. Lamps along the thoroughfares cast muted circles of light, their glow interacting with the soft waves of sound. The mixture of amber light and gentle static created a layered perception, where auditory and visual elements intertwined without urgency or imposition. The air, cooler as night progressed, carried the sounds lightly, bending them around corners and across open spaces, so that the broadcast seemed simultaneously near and distant, tangible and ethereal. Buildings, both large and small, framed the pathways through which the sound traveled. Their facades, colored by the mellow light of street lamps and the silver touch of moon, reflected no urgency, only a subtle receptivity. Windows, often closed but occasionally open, allowed fragments of the distant voice and music to drift into interiors, then back again into the night. The movement was continuous yet unhurried, like a slow current threading through a riverbed, touching each surface softly before moving onward. Foliage in gardens and along avenues whispered quietly as the sound passed. Leaves and branches, heavy with dew or lightly stirred by evening drafts, seemed to receive the notes with calm attention. Occasionally, a subtle rustle would accompany the broadcast, blending seamlessly into the gentle textures of the night. Every element of the outdoor world, walls, trees, fences, participated in this shared, unspoken reception. Footsteps, rare and measured, sometimes intersected with the path of sound. A passerby might shift position, pause briefly, or incline an ear toward the invisible source, yet even these small interruptions did not disturb the gentle rhythm of the broadcast. It persisted above and around them, weaving between moving figures and stationary structures with an equable steadiness. The city or town or village, no matter its size, became a conduit, each element quietly acknowledging the invisible presence of sound. Air currents played a subtle role. The wind carried delicate fragments, sometimes stretching the notes along avenues, sometimes funneling them into narrow corridors between buildings. Each adjustment was imperceptible but continuous, creating a gentle modulation in the way voices and musical interludes were experienced. Even the faint hum of distant machinery or the occasional clatter of a loose shutter contributed to the texture, blending with the broadcast without dominance. Night animals, scarcely stirring, existed alongside these currents. The soft flutter of wings, the quiet scurrying of small creatures, occasionally merged with the transmission, not as interference but as part of the serene tapestry. The voices that had originated in a carefully prepared studio now floated unbound, interacting with the rhythms of the natural world, settling lightly upon rooftops and courtyards and along the edges of open fields. Street corners, long shadows, and lightly illuminated thresholds each absorbed sound differently. Some corners caught phrases more distinctly, the effect of building angles and reflective surfaces subtly emphasizing certain tonalities. Open plazas allowed tones to scatter softly, dissipating gradually into the wider expanse. The interplay of architecture and sound created a shifting landscape, experienced moment by anyone within its reach, whether they noticed or remained still in contemplative quiet. The progression of time was measured by small, almost unnoticed changes. Moonlight shifted across rooftops and pavements. Lamps dimmed in some households as the night advanced. Shadows stretched and contracted imperceptibly. All the while, the sound continued its gentle travel, unobtrusive yet present, threading together disparate spaces in a collective stillness. There was no hurry, no expectation, only continuity. Each tone seemed to linger slightly longer in some places than in others. Walls reflected, absorbed, or dispersed sound, and the street itself contributed subtle reverberations. In quieter areas, a single note might hover, allowing the air to carry it toward the next building or intersection. The effect was cumulative, a continuous yet non-intrusive presence that connected the city or town through invisible channels of listening. Windows, shutters, and doorways framed the passage of sound differently in each home. Some allowed only a whisper of voice to slip out, others more fully. The difference was not significant, merely part of the gentle variation that characterized the night. The experience of sound remained intimate, private even as it stretched across the wider environment. Listeners might not even consciously register its presence, yet the current of it brushed against consciousness with calm persistence. Even the texture of pavements affected the experience. Cobbles, bricks, and flagstones responded differently to the low frequencies of music and voice, subtly shaping the perception of each note. Steps across these surfaces, rare, measured, added to the rhythm in the subtlest way, a quiet accompaniment that harmonized with the broadcast rather than interrupting it. Each motion, each reflective surface, became part of the unfolding nightscape. In these extended spaces, the voice retained the warmth it had acquired in the studio. Though absent a physical body, it carried a sense of human presence across the quiet streets. Each phrase, each musical interval, seemed to inhabit the air temporarily, then drift onward, leaving behind a faint impression of intent and care. The effect was a gentle continuity, a connection between origin and reception, between unseen speaker and unknowing listener. Buildings and gardens, fences and hedges, all played their subtle part. The ambient environment absorbed the tones and then released them, carrying them a few steps further along, blending them with evening breezes, dew on leaves, and the slow pulse of night life. There was no rush, no sense of arrival, only a slow, persistent unfolding, a delicate interweaving of sound, space, and atmosphere. In alleyways, the transmission found new angles. Corners reflected fragments, creating quiet echoes that mingled with shadows and lamp light. In open spaces, notes expanded, touched rooflines, and dissolved into the hush of distant streets. The effect was immersive yet gentle, surrounding each listener in a calm, unhurried embrace, as though the entire town had settled collectively into a state of attentive quiet. As the night progressed, distant murmurs of sound became a shared texture across neighborhoods. Each street, building, and courtyard participated in its own way, transforming the act of listening into a subtle, communal experience. The presence of voice and music was both intimate and widespread, filling the spaces between houses, threading unseen connections, and preparing the world outside for the next gentle transition of night. The subtle rhythm of static began to weave its way through rooms and streets alike, mingling with the quiet pulses of moonlight and lamp glow. Each faint hiss and soft hum carried a texture that complemented the gentle illumination, forming a dialogue between sound and light that was imperceptible yet persistent. In the stillness of homes, the low-frequency vibration of the receivers blended seamlessly with the shifting patterns of shadows cast by curtains, lamp shades, and flickering candles. The atmosphere was unhurried, a quiet interplay that invited attentive stillness without demanding it. Light moved slowly across walls and floors, brushing over familiar surfaces with measured grace. Lamps glowed steadily, pools of amber and soft white tracing the contours of tables, shelves, and chairs. Moonlight poured through windows, silvering the edges of objects, merging with the warmer tones to create subtle gradients that shifted imperceptibly as time passed. Shadows lengthened and softened in concert with the gentle tremors of static, as if the sound itself guided the dance of illumination. In living rooms, the receivers emitted a persistent, almost meditative murmur, a background cadence that required no engagement. The static was not intrusive, it was a companion, a quiet partner to the interplay of light. When a phrase from the previous broadcast rose above the hum, it settled gently over the lingering static, blending into the soft texture of the room rather than breaking it. Every corner, every object seemed to resonate faintly in response, absorbing both illumination and subtle vibration. Windows and doorways framed the path of light and sound. The angle of a lamp's shade could transform a simple table into a canvas for dancing shadows, while the low-frequency static continued its constant, imperceptible rhythm. The sound moved in tandem with the flow of air currents, A draft brushing across a hallway could momentarily carry a whisper of hum farther, brushing against walls and furniture, extending the presence of the invisible orchestra. In this way, the room itself became an instrument, tuned to the quiet interplay of tone and reflection. Even outside, along streets and courtyards, light and sound interlaced with a gentle patience. Street lamps spilled warm circles onto cobblestones, highlighting the faint ripple of static that lingered in the air. Moonlight traced along rooflines, fences, and open doorways, merging with the subtle vibrations to create a diffuse, almost tactile environment. Shadows stretched across walls and sidewalks, moving imperceptibly as the angle of light shifted with the progression of the evening, synchronized with the slow, continuous pulse of sound. Small household gestures took place against this backdrop without disruption. A hand resting lightly on a table, a foot nudging a rug into place, the soft closing of a drawer, all were absorbed by the pervasive calm of light and hum. Nothing was hurried, nothing demanded attention. Instead, these small actions contributed to the layered ambience, enhancing the sensation of quiet continuity, of rooms and streets inhabited yet undisturbed, a living network of slow observation. The static itself carried subtle variations. As electrical currents shifted in the receivers, the soft hiss and faint oscillations created minute patterns that blended with the visual atmosphere. Each pulse, each tonal rise and fall, aligned seamlessly with the play of shadows, sometimes lingering over a polished surface, sometimes fading into a corner where lamp light barely reached. In this delicate symphony, the auditory and visual elements were inseparable, a continuous, unhurried choreography that extended across the night. Fabrics and surfaces interacted with light and sound, absorbing and reflecting both in measured ways. Curtains caught moonlight, softening its edges and blending the glow with the warmer tones of lamplight. Polished wood reflected subtle hints of vibration, as if the faint hum had a visible echo in addition to an auditory one. Walls, neutral in tone, served as gentle canvases for moving shadows, echoing the unbroken continuity of static as it flowed through the air. As the night deepened, the rhythm of light and sound became more pronounced in its subtlety. Shadows lengthened, lamp glow softened further, and the hum carried across rooms with the same patient persistence it had shown from the first hour. Every corner, every object, every patch of floor seemed to participate willingly, holding the low-frequency vibration alongside the soft visual gradations without tension or insistence. It was a harmonious convergence, a slow, perceptible pulse of presence. Outside, the streets held their own participation in this calm choreography. Lamp posts and moonlight traced quiet patterns across pavement, garden walls, and doorsteps. The faintest echo of static seemed to interact with these elements, drifting across courtyards, curving along corners, and mingling with the faint rustle of leaves. The interplay was neither dominant nor intrusive. It was an ambient pulse, a quiet rhythm that complemented the subtle visual atmosphere of the night. Small variations in light, such as the flicker of a candle or the gentle sway of a lamp shade in a draft, synchronized seamlessly with the low hum of the receivers. The combination created a layered environment in which perception itself seemed slowed, as if time were stretching with gentle insistence. Every surface and object became part of a delicate network of reflection and resonance, reinforcing the sensation of a night moving softly and without interruption. Even the quietest corners contributed to the overall effect. Shadows pooled behind furniture, beneath low shelves, and along stairwells, capturing fragments of light and static alike. The interaction was delicate, a near imperceptible modulation that deepened the immersive quality of the evening. Breath and presence, human and mechanical, converged into a subtle unity of sound and vision, allowing the night to carry forward with gentle insistence. Within each home, every receiver hummed in its own unique timbre, its static forming patterns that resonated with the shifting illumination. Slight variations in furniture arrangement, lamp height, or curtain placement produced imperceptible differences, ensuring that each environment experienced the rhythm in its own distinct manner. Yet all spaces shared a fundamental cadence, a quiet continuity that linked room to street, house to neighborhood, through invisible currents of tone and reflection. Time, as perceived in these settings, moved slowly, measured not by the clock but by the gentle progression of light and vibration. Each phrase of previous broadcasts, each interval of static, seemed to stretch across the night, lingering softly before dissolving into the quiet. The interplay of illumination and tone created a calm, meditative atmosphere, encouraging gentle observation or effortless rest. No presence was required beyond quiet awareness, no attention beyond the slow, unbroken rhythm. As the evening deepened further, the convergence of static and light continued, persistent yet unobtrusive. Shadows shifted subtly, lamp glow softened and moved with the subtle rise and fall of electrical pulses, and the low hum continued its steady course. Rooms and streets alike existed in a shared, unhurried equilibrium, where sound and illumination were equal participants in a slow choreography of night. The overall effect was one of immersive calm. Sound and light moved through space, interacting without urgency or expectation. Each minor change, a passing draft, a flicker of illumination, a slight adjustment of a chair, added texture rather than disruption. The rhythm of static and light became a companion to the night itself, a patient presence that could be attended to or left unnoticed, gently guiding the evening toward a continuation of serene observation. The night held its breath in the pauses between broadcasts, a calm expanse where no deliberate sound sought to fill the spaces. The gentle hum of previous static had faded, leaving behind only the faintest impressions of presence, a soft residue of attentive care that seemed to linger in every room and along every street. Light, both from moon and lamp, now traced empty surfaces with a more pronounced quietude, highlighting corners, thresholds, and the gentle contours of objects with an almost contemplative patience. In the streets, shadows lay in soft, uninterrupted stretches, interrupted only by the occasional sway of a tree branch or the faint rustle of leaves stirred by an imperceptible draft. The absence of broadcasted voices created a delicate emptiness, not silent in the stark sense, but layered with the subtle textures of nocturnal life. Footsteps, if they occurred, were rare and slow, absorbed by cobblestones and pavement without disturbance, becoming part of the ambient stillness rather than a break from it. Windows reflected pools of light onto the quiet interiors within, revealing glimpses of furniture, books, and other household items settled into unchanging positions. The intervals between broadcasts seemed to stretch and settle over each surface, carrying with them the gentle hum of remembered sound, now soft and indistinct, a companion to the lingering glow of lamps and the silvery wash of moonlight. In these moments, rooms seemed to breathe slowly, expanding into the calm, unhurried hours. Gardens and courtyards too absorbed the lull. Dew-laden grass and the tender sweep of wind through hedges contributed their own subtle rhythm, unnoticed yet persistent, a slow accompaniment to the vast, quiet intervals that stretched across the town. The absence of structured sound allowed for an enhanced awareness of these delicate textures, an invitation to the senses to linger lightly on the faintest movement or shimmer of light. Every object, every surface, participated without demand or expectation. The progression of time was marked by imperceptible changes. Shadows shifted gently across walls and floors, influenced by the slight movements of lamps or the drift of clouds across the moon. The quiet intervals themselves seemed to possess a cadence, irregular yet persistent, reminding the attentive observer that even absence can have presence. Each breath of air, each whisper of movement, became part of the fabric that stitched the night together, a continuous but unassuming thread. Inside, furniture, walls, and floors absorbed residual vibrations from previous broadcasts. Chairs, tables, and bookcases held echoes faint enough to be imperceptible yet persistent, forming a subtle resonance that linked one room to the next. The sound, now transformed into a memory within the night, interacted with the faint light, creating an intricate interplay of presence and absence. It was as though the night itself kept time, counting the pauses with careful attention, allowing nothing to intrude, yet ensuring that nothing was entirely gone. Along the streets, lamp posts and signs of daily life stood quietly, bearing witness to the spaces left by absence. The intervals gave a gentle shape to the nocturnal landscape, framing the quiet streets with an almost ceremonial patience. Even small, unnoticed elements, the sway of a curtain, the glint of dew on a fence, contributed to a rhythm, subtle and unhurried, that allowed the mind to follow a slow, calm path through otherwise empty spaces. The atmosphere inside homes was similarly transformed. Soft shadows fell across floors, pooling around rugs and furniture with a gentle, irregular motion. The light seemed more fluid, no longer anchored by the presence of active sound, yet shaped by it, a residue of the broadcasts now muted into gentle gradients. The pauses became spaces for observation, for lingering on textures, for quiet awareness of the details that daylight or more active hours might obscure. Even the natural world participated with subtlety. The occasional flight of a night bird, the quiet scurrying of small animals, or the faint rustle of leaves contributed to the soft composition of the night. None of these sounds dominated or interrupted the tranquility, rather they became part of the layered quiet, a delicate accompaniment to the intervals between broadcasts. The world outside and inside moved together, in an unobtrusive concordance, allowing the sense of night to deepen gradually. The intervals also revealed the minor details of life that often go unnoticed. A flicker in a lamp, the sway of a curtain, the tilt of a window pane in the night air, each movement acquired significance in the absence of structured sound. The world seemed to breathe as one entity, time stretching slowly, allowing gentle observation without requiring attention. It was a landscape shaped by the presence of emptiness, a reminder that absence itself can carry weight, and yet it carried no urgency, no expectation. These moments between transmissions were neither void nor inert. The spaces held subtle memory, the echo of sound and light coexisting in a gentle continuum. Each house, each street, and each garden participated in an unspoken dialogue, their stillness a counterpoint to the once-present broadcasts. The effect was pervasive, forming an invisible network of quiet attentiveness that threaded through the town, offering a sense of unity without assertion. The night advanced in a seamless rhythm of light and residual sound. As minutes passed, the intervals lengthened, revealing more subtle shifts in shadow and the faintest interactions between surfaces. A breeze might pass, rustling leaves and nudging a curtain, creating a transient movement that harmonized with the calm established in the absence of broadcast. The entire environment seemed to pulse gently, a slow heartbeat underscoring the passage of night. In these quiet interludes, the observer could notice the way light softened around edges, how shadows pooled without distortion, and how the memory of sound persisted as an intangible texture over every surface. Every window and doorway framed a unique interplay of illumination and residual vibration, an individual experience within a collective stillness. The continuity was soothing, immersive, and non-demanding, allowing thoughts to drift freely with the calm rhythm of the night. The long pauses revealed subtleties in the environment previously unnoticed. Street corners became observatories of shadow and reflection. Alleyways turned into quiet passages of observation, and the spaces between homes seemed to vibrate faintly with residual tone. Even the smallest details, patterns on walls, reflections on glass, the tilt of a shutter, interacted with the quiet, producing a slow and intricate orchestration that could be absorbed effortlessly or left entirely unattended. Light and memory of sound merged into an almost tangible atmosphere, one that invited gentle wandering of the mind without direction or requirement. Surfaces, textures, and the ambient air carried faint impressions of past broadcasts, a soft layering that enriched the calm without imposing. The night itself seemed to expand into these intervals, filling empty streets and rooms with an invisible, unhurried presence, preparing the senses for what was yet to unfold, and yet holding no expectation of outcome. Rooms now held the quiet memory of sound, each one a soft chamber of echoes that lingered after broadcasts had ceased. The walls, ceiling, and floor absorbed and reflected the faintest reverberations, capturing traces of voices, murmurs, and static in gentle layers that neither demanded attention nor intruded. Empty chairs and tables seemed to retain subtle vibrations, each one tuned to the rhythm of the earlier transmissions, holding on to fragments of tone like a slow, invisible pulse. The atmosphere was calm, expansive, and patient, allowing the senses to settle without expectation. Light filtered into these spaces through windows and open shutters, mingling with the echoes to create a delicate overlay of sight and sound. Moonbeams stretched across floorboards and carpets, softening the edges of shadows and diffusing the lingering resonance. A flickering lamp, its flame steady yet gentle, sent warm highlights across the room, enhancing the texture of walls and surfaces while complementing the subtle sound that hovered in the air. The interplay was unhurried, a quiet reminder that even in absence, presence could persist. Corners and thresholds became subtle stages for the reverberations. The faint hum of a previously active receiver would ripple softly through a hallway, brushing against furniture and settling into quiet corners before dissipating. Books, stacked or shelved, absorbed certain frequencies while reflecting others, creating nuanced layers of sound that shifted imperceptibly with air currents and the slow passage of time. The effect was immersive, a calm orchestration that required nothing but gentle awareness. Floorboards and rugs interacted with the echoes in their own way. Each footstep from earlier, each scratch or rustle, had left a residual imprint, now barely perceptible yet contributing to the layered stillness. Drapes and curtains swayed slightly in the night air, modulating the echoes with subtle, almost imperceptible movements. The spaces were alive in their quietude, a soft continuity linking room to room, creating a network of calm resonance that extended beyond the walls into hallways and beyond. The lingering tones of broadcasts wove through furniture and fixtures. A chair angled slightly from its usual place caught the echo differently than the adjacent table, producing variations that were gentle and subdued. The walls seemed to breathe slowly, absorbing and reflecting each micro-resonance. Even the smallest details, the curve of a windowsill, the polished edge of a tabletop, interacted with sound, contributing to an ambient pattern that was continuous yet imperceptible, guiding perception towards stillness rather than awareness. Windows captured traces of external light, which mingled with the interior echoes to form subtle visual textures. Moonlight highlighted the delicate outlines of objects, emphasizing their shape without sharpness or contrast. Shadows softened along floorboards and behind furniture, moving imperceptibly with the slightest adjustments in illumination. The echoes of sound, diffused and gentle, complemented these visual shifts, blending with the environment to create a space that felt both present and dissolved at once. Empty rooms also held their own quiet vitality. Slight creaks of structural wood, the gentle settling of plaster, and the soft movement of air contributed to the lingering soundscape. These minor, almost imperceptible noises wove into the echoes of broadcasts, forming a calm tapestry that filled the spaces without urgency. The night moved slowly here, allowing the observer to notice, or not notice, the interlacing of subtle vibrations, a rhythm so soft it might only be sensed at the edges of perception. Furniture and decor participated in this subtle harmony. A table near a window reflected light and carried echoing tones differently than a low bookshelf tucked into a corner. Curtains swayed in harmony with minor drafts, casting shadows that shifted imperceptibly across walls and floors. The gentle layering of sound and light invited quiet observation, or allowed one to simply drift, the mind following the soft undulations of resonance without demand. Hallways and connecting rooms carried their own echoes, linking spaces together with threads of faint, residual sound. Each doorway acted as a gentle filter, softening the resonance and allowing it to spill gradually into the next space. The pattern was continuous, unbroken, yet unobtrusive, an invisible network of sound that gave the empty rooms a sense of continuity and gentle presence. Time seemed to stretch, marked not by minutes but by the delicate fading of tones and the slow interplay of light and shadow. The furniture itself became an acoustic partner. Cushioned chairs absorbed frequencies differently than hardwood surfaces, while tables, shelves, and cabinets reflected and modulated the hum with subtle variation. Each object contributed to the layered atmosphere, reinforcing the calm yet richly textured environment. It was a quiet choreography of material, light, and sound, orchestrated by the slow and patient progression of night. The ceilings and walls played their part as well, carrying echoes that rose and fell in near imperceptible waves. Cracks and recesses offered subtle channels for sound to traverse, sometimes amplifying, sometimes muting, creating an irregular yet soothing variation across the room. Every surface, from the polished floor to the textured wallpaper, was an active participant in this slow, unhurried ballet, allowing sound to persist without pressure or insistence. Light continued its gentle dance, accentuating echoes where it fell upon reflective surfaces. A polished doorknob glimmered faintly in moonlight, catching the resonance as it shifted subtly with the movement of air. The soft hue of a lamp reflected along a wall, creating gradients that deepened the perception of space while blending seamlessly with the muted sound. These interactions produced an environment that was immersive yet calm, intricate yet effortless, guiding the senses toward relaxation. Even the faintest remaining whispers from earlier broadcasts seemed to inhabit the corners and alcoves of rooms. They intermingled with the subtle nocturnal noises of settling houses and shifting fabrics, creating a quiet symphony that could be noticed, appreciated, or left entirely unattended. This pervasive calm gave a sense of continuity across the night, connecting spaces through the gentle persistence of tone and reflection. As the night advanced, echoes softened further, transforming into near silence without ever vanishing completely. Rooms retained memory in their shape, texture, and the gentle light upon surfaces, while subtle hums and reverberations offered the softest accompaniment to stillness. Observation could wander freely, drifting along lines of light and sound, feeling the continuity of the night without requiring attention or engagement. The interplay of residual sound and quiet illumination created an enveloping atmosphere, a cocoon of gentle presence. Each empty room, hall, and alcove contributed to this subtle web, allowing the mind to wander along soft contours and lingering vibrations. The night's progression was slow, deliberate in its imperceptibility, and entirely patient, offering a calm passage forward. Every object, surface, and shadow seemed attuned to the fading echoes, participating in a quiet chorus that was neither loud nor insistent. The environment carried a sense of careful preservation, where sound, light, and stillness intertwined to create a meditative calm. In this shared resonance, each room held its own story, quietly continuing as the night unfolded, offering gentle textures and soft guidance for drifting awareness. The night, though largely silent, was not without subtle signs of connection, small threads of life interwoven through empty rooms and along deserted streets. In a dimly lit corner, a faint glimmer of light from a distant window hinted at someone awake, perhaps quietly tending to a simple task, their movements barely disturbing the encompassing calm. Across the street, the reflection of moonlight on a pane of glass mirrored the soft sway of a curtain, suggesting presence without articulation, a gentle reminder that even in absence, life continued in delicate rhythms. Gardens carried their own whispers of connection. Dew clung to petals and leaves, capturing faint glimmers of silver that shifted slightly with each passing breeze. The night air carried traces of warmth from earlier activity, as though the earth itself remembered the touch of human hands tending soil or gathering herbs. Footsteps, long since faded, left impressions in the soft earth or on the pathways between hedges, offering subtle cues to previous passage, their presence now rendered almost invisible, yet perceptible to careful observation. Inside the houses, the objects themselves seemed to speak quietly of connection. Chairs, slightly moved from their usual positions, suggested recent occupation. Books and papers rested where they had been left, their arrangement hinting at routines paused rather than abandoned. Even the gentle flicker of candlelight, dancing across walls and ceilings, reflected small gestures of care. A trimmed wick, a lightly adjusted holder, a deliberate placement that acknowledged the inhabitant's presence, however understated. Corridors carried soft traces of movement, almost imperceptible against the otherwise pervasive stillness. The echoes of doors opening and closing earlier in the evening lingered as subtle shifts in air, causing the light and shadows to interact with a barely noticeable rhythm. These minor disturbances harmonized with the residual echoes of broadcasts, creating a nuanced texture of sound and space, suggesting continuity and quiet observance rather than intrusion. Windows offered glances of muted activity beyond their panes. A single candle flickered in a distant room, its reflection bending gently against the glass, hinting at the hands that tended it. Across the way, the faint outline of a figure moving past a doorway created a soft disturbance in the still air, noticeable only by the subtle change in shadow or a muted sound absorbed immediately by the heavy quiet of the night. These observations did not demand attention. They merely invited gentle awareness, an acknowledgement of life's slow persistence. The ambient light from street lamps interacted with these traces of presence, casting long, soft-edged shadows that played over walls, fences, and cobblestones. The subtle interplay of illumination and darkness highlighted small details: a partially open gate, a glinting doorknob, a garden tool set aside, each element suggesting deliberate care and routine, woven seamlessly into the calm of the evening. The night offered these glimpses without urgency, allowing them to be noticed or ignored at will, their quiet rhythm contributing to the overall serenity. Even inanimate objects conveyed hints of connection. A teacup left drying by a sink, a stack of papers on a desk, a folded cloth on a chair, all suggested a human touch, a moment of interaction now suspended in time. These artifacts carried no weight beyond their quiet presence, yet collectively they formed a gentle narrative of life unfolding in measured, unhurried patterns. Their existence was soft but persistent, a network of understated attention permeating the stillness. Outside, subtle movements of nature mirrored the quiet signals of connection. Leaves brushed against one another, stirred by light gusts, creating gentle, random rhythms. Small animals moved softly through underbrush or along rooftops, leaving faint traces that suggested ongoing life without disruption. Even the air itself seemed to hold memories of warmth and motion, carrying them across spaces both occupied and empty, connecting moments past to the ongoing night with barely perceptible intention. Sounds that remained from earlier human activity were similarly delicate. A door latch settling, the soft creak of a floorboard adjusting to temperature, the faint brushing of cloth, each resonated in the muted environment, mingling with the echoing chambers of previous broadcasts. These minor notes did not intrude but contributed to a layered texture of calm observation, encouraging the listener to drift along, carried gently by the interplay of presence and absence. Light and shadow continued to interact with the quiet hints of connection. Moonlight traced delicate patterns across floorboards, reflecting faintly on surfaces that had been touched only moments or hours before. Shadows shifted slowly in response to the smallest movements, creating a dance that was both unhurried and continuous. Every detail, every subtle trace of human presence, became part of a soft, ambient rhythm that extended the calmness of the night, gently linking interior spaces with the wider world beyond. The night's quiet threads of connection were never insistent. They existed for the attentive eye, the observant ear, or simply for the mind to rest upon, integrating into a slowly unfolding tapestry. The faint glimmers of life, whether a lingering echo, a reflected light, or a soft trace on the earth, provided reassurance without urgency, presence without demand. The environment felt attentive, yet patient, offering companionship in stillness without requiring engagement. As the hours progressed, these signs of connection softened further, blending into a near uniformity of calm. Individual movements, traces, and reflections merged with shadows and residual echoes, creating a seamless experience in which awareness could ebb and flow freely. The spaces between human activity became a canvas for observation, for gentle awareness, and for the mind to drift, guided by a continuity that was palpable yet never pressing. Rooms, streets, gardens, and courtyards all participated in this quiet web. Each subtle glimmer of connection added to the shared rhythm of the night, linking separate spaces into an understated but perceptible whole. The effect was soothing, immersive, and effortless. A world alive in small, deliberate ways, yet entirely patient, allowing the night itself to carry the mind and senses forward in calm continuity. This pervasive sense of gentle interconnection created a final stage for the night's progression, a soft bridge toward complete stillness. Every whisper of movement, reflection, and residual sound contributed to a slow, unhurried cadence. Each subtle sign of life invited a quiet acknowledgement without demand, allowing thought and awareness to drift freely, carried forward in the seamless calm of the nocturnal world. As the night deepened, every subtle glimmer of connection began to blend into a more uniform calm. The faint traces of movement in rooms and corridors, the gentle swaying of curtains, the residual echoes of voices and footsteps, all slowly faded into a seamless quiet. The environment became softer, more diffuse, as if the night itself were pressing gently upon every surface, absorbing the remaining vibrations and smoothing out all distinctions. Walls and floors held only a suggestion of what had been, the memory of presence almost imperceptible yet tenderly preserved in the textures of the space. Light itself softened to its minimum, leaving long shadows to drift lazily across empty rooms and quiet streets. Moonlight filtered through windows with a tender touch, brushing gently against polished floors, faded wallpaper, and carefully arranged furniture. The gleam on a tabletop, the faint shimmer of a doorknob, the subtle reflection on a glass pane, all contributed to a delicate lattice of illumination that was comforting rather than revealing. Every object appeared at ease, resting in its place, participating in the slow descent towards stillness. The air carried a delicate coolness, blending with the lingering warmth from the day's faint memories. Each breath of wind through open shutters or along the rooftops carried a muted fragrance, the gentle scent of earth, aged wood, or a faint trace of waxed candle. These elements mingled with one another, forming a calm, continuous backdrop that neither demanded attention nor suggested movement. The night's composition was subtle and unhurried, a soft embrace that guided all senses toward relaxation. Residual sounds, those barely audible traces of earlier life, merged into a low, consistent hush. The gentle settling of floorboards, the slow drip of condensation from a roof, and the faint rustle of fabric in a gentle draft all harmonized into a tranquil resonance. The echoes that had previously danced between walls now dissolved, leaving only a sense of continuity, a quiet rhythm that could be felt more than heard. Each note, each whisper of sound folded gently into the next, creating a near imperceptible flow. Outside, the landscape shared in this serene conclusion. Shadows along cobblestone streets and garden paths lengthened and softened, blurring the outlines of hedges, fences, and trees. Leaves moved with only the gentlest breath of air, stirring faintly before coming to rest. The faintest twinkle of a distant lantern reflected on a window pane or along a distant wall, becoming part of the calm, merging with the silvery tones of the moon and the softened contours of night. Presence remained, but in a quiet, unobtrusive way, part of the larger lull that had settled over all things. Windows and doorways became portals to this seamless quiet. Each pane of glass, each threshold, seemed to drink in the night, reflecting its stillness outward and inward simultaneously. The interplay of faint interior light and the deepening shadows outside created an environment that felt suspended between worlds, neither fully occupied nor completely empty, a gentle liminality that allowed attention to drift effortlessly. The night's rhythm was slow, steady, and forgiving, with no urgency to move or act, only the soft persistence of calm. Inside, objects appeared to exhale with the night, releasing the subtle tensions that had accumulated through the day and evening. Chairs settled into shadows, tables and desks absorbed the last remnants of human touch, and small items, from books to utensils, became part of the ambient quiet. The arrangement of things seemed deliberate yet unforced, a choreography of repose that guided the mind toward ease. Each item, each surface, contributed to the perception of a world gently winding down, embracing silence without abruptness. The final layers of light and shadow, sound and stillness, intermingled to create a comprehensive sense of rest. Moonlight continued its slow passage across floors and walls, gradually diminishing as dawn approached in the far distance, imperceptible yet certain. Shadows merged, edges softened, and the distinctions between objects, walls, and floor began to dissolve. Air moved only gently, carrying faint traces of warmth and moisture that hinted at the living world without revealing it fully. Even the smallest elements of the night participated in this slow settling. The subtle shifting of a curtain, the delicate settling of dust motes in a shaft of light, the final tremor of a distant echo, all harmonized with the pervasive calm. There was no need for focus, no requirement to notice or interpret. The night's descent was complete in its quiet patience, enveloping every detail in a soft embrace that encouraged thought, attention, and worry to soften and fade. The rhythmic continuity of air, light, and sound formed a final tapestry for the night. Faint reflections from window panes, gentle creaks in floorboards, and muted shivers in furniture combined into a persistent but soft pattern. This pattern neither pressed nor demanded, merely existed as a steady companion for drifting awareness. A mind allowed to follow these subtle cues would find itself guided naturally into the slow rhythm of the night, where observation and relaxation coexist seamlessly. By the time the night reached its deepest point, the distinction between inner and outer spaces had largely dissolved. Rooms, streets, gardens, and corridors all shared in a uniform hush. Every surface, object, and shadow participated in this calm continuity, holding the night together in a gentle, enveloping embrace. The faintest traces of sound and light remained, not as interruptions but as gentle markers of presence, confirming continuity while allowing all else to rest. The night carried forward without haste, moving softly from one space to another, its touch light and patient. Every detail, from the texture of walls to the glimmer on a doorknob, from the softest echo to the dimmest reflection, contributed to a pervasive sense of completion that was open-ended rather than finite. There was no need for conclusions, no imperative for finality, only the steady rhythm of calm, the quiet passage of hours, and the slow dissolving of light, shadow, and sound. As the final moments unfolded, the night seemed to sigh gently, pressing against surfaces with a soft and consistent touch. Shadows lengthened further, echoes became imperceptible, and the remaining traces of human presence folded into the broader quiet. The air, the light, the textures of walls, floors, and furniture, all conspired to form a seamless, restful expanse. The observer or listener could drift freely along these contours, carried without effort toward complete stillness. The night had fully settled, yet it remained patient, holding each object, surface, and sound in gentle suspension. Every corner, every shadow, every residual tone of the evening merged into an enveloping quiet that could be followed or simply felt. Awareness could wander, settle, or dissolve entirely, guided by the slow, careful orchestration of stillness that stretched from room to street, from garden to corridor, all the way into the soft horizon of pre-dawn light. You don't need to keep listening anymore. The story can fade into the background now, becoming softer with every moment. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. There's no rush and nothing you need to remember. Just let your breathing slow down. Let your thoughts drift where they want to go. And allow the quiet of this night to settle around you. This story will remain here, gently playing while you rest. Tomorrow night, a new night will be waiting for you, and it's one you won't want to miss. And if sleep hasn't arrived just yet, you can quietly return to one of the previous nights, and let those stories guide you instead. For now, sleep well.